Welcome to episode 7 of intx, the podcast where we have career conversations in tech. This episode, we talk to the multi award winning architect, Evelyn Lee, who, despite having a background professionally and academically in not technical architecture but actually building architecture, now currently works as the global head of workplace strategy and innovation at Slack. She's the founder of the Practice of Architecture and co-host of podcast Practice Disrupted. Now, despite a traditional background in architecture, Evelyn transitioned to the tech industry to focus on building better experiences for people, and this is through workplace strategy and innovation. Now, during this conversation, we talk about the importance of finding a role that follows your passions, the benefits of flexible working schedules, and the challenges and benefits of transitioning to a career in tech. So make sure to leave a rate and review, and let's get into the episode.
So the interesting thing is I was one of those kids that knew growing up that I wanted to be an architect. So it's funny, Luke, you and I, because we started talking at the beginning of the conversation and you were like trying to distinguish between whether or not I was a building architect and whether or not I was a technical architect. So I am a licensed building architect in the United States. What that literally entails is a bunch of education, a bunch of examinations, and a bunch of time working in specific areas at architecture firms, either on the construction site or doing construction documents. But I was one of those people that always knew I wanted to be an architect until I became an architect. And similar to you, Luke, I found that like it didn't feel right to me. Like I felt a little bit out of place. I never considered myself a great designer, but I loved the project management side of architecture and I loved the construction administrative side of architecture. I ended up going back to school and getting my MBA and my MPA, so Master's in Public Administration. And when I compare the two, I would say an MBA teaches you more about quantitative analysis, and MPA teaches you a little bit more about qualitative analysis. And I came back and I actually was working at an architecture firm on their strategy team, which looks to expand the value architects bring. And a lot of that work was with organizations, the Nature Conservancy, like large organizations and businesses working on their workplace strategy. So this was pre-pandemic when people were still conscientious of what they were spending. So they were interested in growing their business, but growing within the same physical footprint. So a lot of what I did was taking people or taking organizations and companies from offices to like a hoteling or open desk situation, and then having to support and manage all of the change management, teaching managers how to lead teams in a new environment, essentially helping organizations establish new ways of working and then getting them from point A to point B. So this is all pre-pandemic. And doing a lot of design guidelines at scale. And ultimately, that's how I ended up in tech. I was doing it as an outside consultant at the strategy group, and then I went to brokerage. So Saville, Studley, and Newmark are pretty globally known, but I was on the consulting side of brokerage doing similar things on their workplace strategy group. And then it was so nice to land internal at Slack. And you and I talked about this a little bit at the top of or before we started recording, but obviously, you know, every technology firm is a business, so there's a G&A side to running a business. So a lot of the work I do really supports the employee experience. So we support the engineers, the marketers, the sales team. But it's really on how do you attract and retain the best employees in the business, and that's the side that I'm supporting.
Yeah. So then, would you say that it's like through architecture that was your domain to kind of learn business and strategy, and now you're kind of implementing that into tech.
Yeah, so through architecture, the interesting thing about architecture is a lot of people don't fully understand, I think, what architects do. A more relevant term to a lot of people is we're system designers. So if you think about the idea of a building, there's a lot of systems that go into building, and there's a lot of coordination between a lot of different consultants to make a building happen. So
Mm-hmm.
if you disassociate that from the building, it's working with a lot of different experts towards a common goal, and making sure those work streams are delivered in a timely manner. So I mean, it's not dissimilar actually from project management. Um, and you and I were talking about PMO too, right? So at its core, I I would consider myself a systems architect or a systems thinker in that way. And what I do does support the employee experience from an architectural side, but my role also has evolved over the course of the pandemic. Um, it went from how do I create standards around the offices we're building to um, what is the role of the office in the future and how is it a part of the bigger employee experience. So I would say about 20% of what I do actually touches our physical office space. Um, and the larger piece of what I do is how do we develop new asynchronous ways of working to allow our employees the flexibility they want,
Mm-hmm.
but still have a productive workforce.
Ah, yeah. Because I was gonna ask then. So when you were into Slack, um, how did that position arise? Was it something you went looking for, or?
It was definitely something I went looking for. I don't think they knew at the time exactly what they wanted either.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing about startups, and this is true not only of Slack, but a lot of startups that I have worked with as an outside consultant, the
Mm-hmm.
person that ends up leading their real estate team or the person that ends up as their head of global build is usually their first office manager. It's somebody who helped them move in from their first office to their second office, and then they got really excited about that process and hiring architects, and then they continued in that to grow in that role as the company grew.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just certain things that they didn't realize, or that those individuals, just not necessarily having a background in architecture and design and delivery, didn't realize that can help standardize processes. So we have these exceptionally gorgeous offices at Slack, but all of our conference rooms, for instance, were different sizes because we essentially told the architect we need so many small, medium, and large conference rooms, but we didn't give them like a typical dimension of a small conference room. So even
Right.
our small conference rooms were different sizes. So I ultimately I was brought in to help guide that process a little bit and create some structure around how we were building our buildings. So when I was brought on, I would say a lot more of what I was doing was touching the built environment. Um, Now I would say
Ah.
a lot less.
So then when you joined Slack, they were getting offices built, and so you were in as like a kind of intermediary between these kind of architects building it and the company.
Mhm.
Ah, right. Okay, cool. So that makes sense. Yeah. So when you come in, I see on LinkedIn it says senior experience designer. Was that like the overarching role that kind of encompassed this?
Yeah, it was a senior experience, like it was an experience designer from like an employee experience standpoint. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things I did when I um and and the other thing that I found is, and this is true of any engagement that I was working on before I was at Slack as an external consultant, was essentially did a deep dive in the company where I was interviewing a lot of the leaders and understanding how their teams were working and if the spaces we were building were supporting the way the teams work. So
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of what my role and responsibility. Are we building the spaces that our teams need to be successful? And in order to do that, you need to talk to your stakeholders.
Yep. So for senior experience designer, then that was another part of your role actually looking at the kind of employee experience internally, and kind of in what way?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was working cross-functionally with a lot of teams. So there's a
Right.
lot of different teams. So Slack, before the acquisition, I think we were very close to, or just a little over 3,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
with multiple, I can't remember exactly how many offices globally, but we had a learning and development team that needed space to do their training, training room. We had an onboarding team. Um, we have a biz tech team that supports the technology. We had obviously a workplace services and operations team that supported them on the ground operationally. So I mostly worked as an individual contributor across those functions to make sure that we were all talking to one another, and that we were looking at like the holistic employee experience, and that we're also providing the spaces that those team needs to function well. So for instance, workplace operations was always suffering from lack of storage. Like, they have these multi-purpose rooms that are supposed to be doing a lot of different things, but they didn't have any place to like store different types of furniture arrangements um, in the background. So in order to support that team, we needed to make sure that we built more storage into our offices. So things like things like that is how I work kind of cross-functionally across the entire employee experience.
Right. So kind of mainly like a physical experience type of a domain.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
physical. I mean, and I guess one of the misnomers of Slack, even on our tool, was that we were very much an in-office type of shop. We're like any other company, right? We had
Mm-hmm.
3% of our workforce was remote, and everyone had one-to-one assigned desks. And
Right.
um, whatever, idea that anyone had about coming into the office on a regular basis, like that, you know, I feel like that conversation never happened pre-pandemic, but
Yeah.
but we would just show up at the office more regularly. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, of course. And yeah, I was just asking the questions to clarify because I know that like experience, when I read experience, first thing I was thinking is like user experience. So I'm trying to think as employee experience is a similar thing. But I can see now that jump from architecture into business. And so for these kind of building plans that you're working with, how has that now impacted your role post kind of COVID and with remote working coming in?
Yeah, I think every organization's trying to decide what is the role of the office in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's much more about, for us, as a business unit within a larger entity like Salesforce, for
Yeah.
us, time spent together in the office is really about, I would say it's mostly about team building and collaboration, right? So all of those desks, those sea of desks that so many offices have, become a lot less relevant in the office of the future. We also realize, um, we are in San Francisco, so clearly there are people that would prefer to come into the office to do deep down focused work than they would stay at home with their roommates or their family, where they're,
Yeah.
eating and sleeping and working all in the same space. So we will, I think there will always be a place for that in the office, but the ratio of desks to collaborative space, and then how you support the types of meetings that people are having when they come together are going to be is going to continue to evolve. So that's part of my role, is looking at how do we change the space, but it's not only how do we change the physical the physical space, that requires changes from the operations team to operate those spaces differently than they did. It also requires changes from our biz tech team in terms of what type of technology goes into those spaces to create a better hybrid experience. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think our teams are so distributed now that even if all of the best intention is to bring everyone together, inevitably there may be those one or two people for whatever reason that still need to call in remote. So how do we think about making that experience as equitable for those calling in as it is for those in person, and what are even operations process and policies that we need to change um, to ensure those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, from a strategic perspective, are you now with the kind of increase in prevalence to remote working? Are you looking at it more from a reactive point of view of how do we change the office, or is there is the strategy more aligned to bringing people back in? I suppose a marriage of the both.
Well, I mean, there's definitely leadership that I think would like to see certain behaviors. So the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing about Slack is we have a research consortium called the Future Forum. So if you go to futureforum.com, you'll see that Slack is an affiliated partner, a founding partner of the Future Forum. And they've been doing these interesting pulse surveys throughout the pandemic every quarter for of desk workers or knowledge workers to see how their sentiments have changed over time. So you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of even see how sentiments have changed, um, like when companies started their return to office policies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what they are finding, and what we talk a lot about within our business unit at Slack, is that this remote work has actually increased sense of belonging in minority groups, including women, um, African Americans, and Asians and Hispanics. And a lot of that, I mean, there's more science and research into that, but a lot of it is um, just being at home and being able to show up as yourself and not have to do code switching when you're going into like essentially dressing up for, like, literally and physically
Mm-hmm.
and mentally dressing up for work and going in. And then there's this notion of you don't feel as many of the microaggressions um, when you're at home too. So there's a lot of, I think, more scientific research going into like why that happens. So we're not necessarily encouraging people to come back to the office just to come back in. We are encouraging teams to come back in with um, with with the intention of doing things together that you can't
Yeah.
otherwise do in a remote environment. So we've said we're a digital first company, but digital first is always very quickly followed by digital first doesn't mean never in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense because I've noticed that in a range of companies as well that they're not trying to push people to come back per se, but what they're trying to do is um, bring people back in when the purpose is there, such as specific collaborations and things like that.
Yeah, and that's historically true if you look at all like companies that have been has been remote from the inception, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
still find opportunities to bring people together, sometimes yearly, sometimes as much as quarterly. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so then you moved from senior experience designer into head of workplace strategy and innovation. Um, how was that transition? What did it entail?
I think it was kind of a result of the pandemic, but clearly the role of the office is changing. you know, like I said, we're like every other company trying to figure it out. So there needed to be a group of individuals that came together, and I'm a part of that group. It's called the Digital First Task Force, that looks at the learnings from the Future Forum and asks ourselves, how do we apply it to Slack the company?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, And I think we very much are, we really positioned Slack well in terms of, throughout the pandemic, we established ourselves kind of as a learning culture, right? Leadership, everyone was very transparent and open about saying, we're going to try a lot of things and we're not going to get it right the first time, but bear with us and give us feedback to help us continue to improve. So I think now, as we're looking at what is the future of work, what is return to office look like, um, we're doing a lot of different experimenting, right? And a silly experiment, which actually was great, had great results when we talked about um, the, everybody showing up equitably, whether you're in the office or not, is, for a while we were doing, if one dials in, all dials in, essentially. So even if you're sitting around the same conference room table, we had everyone dialing in. So the
Mhm.
person on the other side, because we weren't spending a lot of money on technology right at the time. There's definitely technology that enables this now, but then everyone shows up as an individual Zoom square for the person that's dialing in still. And it's much easier for them to interact than it is to try to interrupt a discussion that's happening around a table.
Yeah, definitely. I even noticed that the other day. I was in one of those calls where it's like 10 of us on the side panel, and then everyone else is in person. And you do get that kind of, it's not awkward, but you feel almost as if you're part of the stage, or you just feel kind of detached. See, I've never heard of that before. If one dials in, all dial in, but definitely makes sense.
So that means that everyone shows up as their individual Zoom thing. And the other benefit that too of that is, when you're in the conference room, as soon as you start projecting the call, if it's a Zoom room or a Google Meet room or whatever, you lose the function to see what's happening in chat. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
about you, but our chat function became a lot more active when everybody was on the conference call, right? There's kind of these little, anything from emoji reactions and cheering on, or like agreeing with what was being said, to kind of just like the little side conversations you would normally have even in person. So
Mm-hmm.
the one thing that's great about one dials in, all dials in, and we've actually transitioned this over to huddles now on our Slack platform, is that you can still see the chat function. And the other thing that we found with the chat function is, introverts tend to
Mm-hmm.
engage in meetings more through the chat function. So you want to ensure that that's still active and gets maintained even as you're returning back to work. At least we felt that was important. So yeah. So
Good.
those are the type of things from like a user experience, future of work, workplace innovation, which it doesn't take a lot of money to experiment with, but
Mm-hmm.
that we're just testing out to make a better experience for everyone.
Yeah, that's cool. And on that note of kind of virtual meeting, what's your opinion, and have you any experience in, you might know where this is gonna go, like metaverse type experiences?
Um, there was a first, I was reading, I think out of New York, but there was literally one of the first court cases, and it wasn't a very, um, I don't want to say it wasn't a non-important court case, but one of the first court cases happened, where was litigated, or I don't know the terminology, happened in the metaverse.
Right.
And the judge essentially gave the distinction that it makes the justice system more accessible to everyone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because if you think about some of the people that have just fallen on bad luck, so even need to show up in court to get parking tickets erased from um, their record, but like the parking tickets aren't due to necessarily negligence. It's just literally like, if they are cleaning houses, running from house to house, who has time to keep coming out and checking a meter, for instance, like that becomes a very disheartening cycle, right? but her argument was that it like now people can call in and be present at their court, at the courtroom, which makes the judicial system more accessible to all. So I mean, I definitely think there's a place for the metaverse. I think it's early days. I know Salesforce has been doing a lot of things that I'm actually unaware of, bringing clients into the metaverse for kind
Mm-hmm.
of a client experience. Um, yeah, I think, I don't think the technology, well, I'm, there's definitely, I take that back. There's definitely companies out there that are looking at it from the employee experience.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, I think we're literally just trying to wrap our head around um, this before we make the jump to the metaverse. I think we're always thinking about what is the potential of the metaverse, um, but we're also like we have to deal with the technology that we have now, and tech firms all over the world are cutting back on budgets,
Yeah.
um, not investing in more right now. So we're working with what we got.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it was something I was just curious as to if you'd thought about it, just because it's supposed to be like a physical representation. Um,
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't, like, architects talk about this all the time. Like the programming language that you use to build out the metaverse is different from, like, we cannot right now take our architecture models and drop them directly into the metaverse. You have to learn a whole new language to build in the metaverse. So yeah.
oh, nightmare. Well, there you go. Business opportunity. Make an interpreter. No, that's cool. And so then, for like the building stuff, as I've talked to an architect for the first time ever, and I know nothing about it, how does that whole process work? So Slack is expanding, or they've been acquired, and now they need offices, and so.
Yeah, I mean, so we didn't need, I guess our focus was on when we were a standalone startup before acquisition, which is when I was hired on to my original position. I think as soon as we had, like every other company, this kind of silly one-to-one desking policy. So as soon as all of the desks were full and assigned to new hires, and we were a fast growing company, we think we were onboarding at least 40 new people a week or something ridiculous like that. The Googles were onboarding a lot more. The Fangs of the world were onboarding a lot more a week. But you just need to find new offices all the time. So my
Mhm.
job was literally um, helping support a process around that. So it makes it
Yeah.
easier to. So where are we looking? They tell us where we're looking for offices, and then we say, is it close to public transportation? Do we want to be closer to city centers? There are a lot of things for our people to do, to go out to lunch, for it to be in the community. So I, kind of set up those parameters around what type of building and location would we look for within the city. And then we would go out and scout offices. And then I also set up kind of the overall vision for the office, like so the overall look and feel. And then I supported hiring architects, and then I would hand it over to the build team, and they would run with the project. And I also supported the development of the program. So, how many desks to conference rooms do we need to large multi-functioning gathering space? Um, Slack was notorious in the best way possible for building out these really gorgeous coffee bars. So, we needed to make sure we had space for the coffee bar. Um, but building out, you still have to develop a program. And I don't know what this is in developer language, but you still have to develop the parameters of the building, right?
Hmm.
If we believe we're growing, if headcount, if I'm being told we're growing by X number of headcount over X number of years, how many desks does that mean? how many conference rooms do we need to support that many people? How big does our coffee bar need to be? Big does our gathering space need to be? We used to have a space large enough to hold the entire population, like when we came together for all hands at each office. So I would, in essentially a spreadsheet, develop a program for the office. Actually, I had a wonderful teammate that developed a more interactive spreadsheet where you can literally just enter in the head count and then play around with the ratios, and it would spit out a program on the other end. But that's all a part of kind of dependent upon how we're using our spaces too, and varies from company to company.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say is the most challenging part of your role?
I mean, for me personally, I think it's been how it's evolved through the pandemic, like from
Mm-hmm.
from where it was through the pandemic, and how I think it will continue to evolve as we figure out what type of roles do we need going
Yeah.
forward. Um, it's been exciting, but I feel like everything is kind of net new. So we are building it as we're figuring it, we're building the plane as we're flying it, I guess is the phrase.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the most challenging part. And then just, helping build a business case for the value that I bring into that role then.
Mm-hmm.
Versus before, it was very easy to say, like, this is the value I'm bringing to my role. And helping us understand what the office needs are.
Yeah, yeah, because they've expanded quite a lot. Is it? I would imagine from a kind of ignorant perspective that it would be, how to build bigger offices, better offices, things like that. Whereas now, the need for that simple trajectory has changed quite a lot. It's I imagine, and that's how I was going down that route of kind of virtual stuff. Is it appears like that could be the future of this type of role, that it is just expanding from like a kind of simply a brick and mortar and seats into like including technologies, like even just Zoom kind of comes into this because that's a location of types for some remote workers, and then in the future metaverse and things. So yeah, it's ever evolving.
Definitely working cross-functionally with all these
Yeah.
other functions. But I feel like somebody has to be able to look at all of the functions and say, like, what is the day in the life of every employee? Like what does that all kind of accumulate to? And are we making things easier for our employees? Or are we making things more difficult for our employees to get the work?
Yeah, 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 like an overarching kind of employee experience type role. And so then the flip side of that would be, what's the most rewarding part of your role?
I I think it's getting to talk with our people and getting and hearing their concerns and being able and ultimately being in a position where I can respond to those concerns and say, we heard you, we're fixing this, we're changing things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one of the things that I struggled most being a building architect is it takes us so long to get a building built. And sometimes the people you were talking to at the beginning of the project are no longer there by the time the building's finished. Um, and their needs have changed a little bit, and it's just much harder to be super responsive when it
Yeah,
takes like 4 to 5 years to build a building. So I like the fact that I can that can flip a switch that helps somebody in some instances literally the next day. It processes and operations always takes a little longer, but yeah.
yeah. Do you think then that's something that you've enjoyed and will kind of pull you towards a tech space? Is that speed?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there's so many other reasons why I left architecture. And you don't want me to get on my soapbox for that. But like the culture in architecture, I think really needs to change. Architecture is like, it's the equivalent to the starving artist syndrome. We constantly undercut our fees. What that means for a lot of people in doing the work, though, is long hours and low pay. So there's just so many reasons why I think architecture needs to change, why I'm so much happier in tech. The other really interesting thing to me that in joining tech that we really struggle with in architecture, architecture is kind of you have to earn your badges, you have to earn your stripes to earn responsibility. Is mindset versus I remember showing up my first day at Slack and they're like, you're here for a reason. You made it through our interview process. Like, you can contribute to day one and your voice has equal footing. It doesn't matter if you're an intern or if you're like a senior vice president or executive vice president. Like, we want to hear what you have to say. That type of mindset almost never happens in architecture. It's literally like, you're here, you need to learn your place. You need to do so many hours of construction documents before you even let you talk to a client. That's kind of like,
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, that kind of old-fashioned mindset, if it were, as it were.
yeah. But then there's definitely things that like I have to deal with on the tech side that I haven't had to deal with on the architecture side. So, at Slack we have coffee bars and a ton of snacks, and we had this whole food and beverage channel, right? And people were complaining to us when we switched the brand of like the green tea, which I would never think as an employee in an architecture firm to complain. We would be lucky if we had a green tea offering. We usually have to make our own coffee. Like the biggest debate in the office is, do we buy ground beans or whole beans and have to grind them ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So the level of kind of, I mean, that's also been interesting to see. The employee expectations are a lot different.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's maybe now not the same because of the kind of layoffs and stuff. So people are getting a bit scared in this space. But generally speaking, and especially for years pre COVID, definitely was like the kind of techies. It's they have a expectation.
Yes, I think that's the nicest way to put it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll need to do a bit of soul search. I wonder if I have some expectations that I've not realized. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's one of those things that's unheard of everywhere except from these kind of high end, kind of techie type firms, and startups, or certain startups. So the move then into Slack as that kind of breath of fresh air, was it a conscious decision that you wanted to move into the tech architectural space?
I was looking for something different. I mean, the interesting thing about my career, having looked back on it, right? Like I said, I was this person that knew I wanted to be an architect, and that because of how many steps it takes to become an architect, that sent me on this 12-year journey, literally. And then I was completely lost when I got to the end of that journey, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do right now. I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot more used to kind of ambiguity and for it being about the journey rather than the destination. So I was definitely worn out um, on the brokerage side of consulting because I felt like I had to sell my services to the brokers who they were the link to the client. And then I had to sell it again to the client because I felt like I was doing a lot more selling than I was actually doing the work.
Yeah.
and I missed the work. So I was looking at the time I was looking for an opportunity to get back to doing the work rather than the selling. So that's ultimately why I left.
Yeah, because that makes sense then why you would move into the tech space, even if that was on accident, is that it's a space where for most roles within it, especially in a kind of startup style, when you come in it as let's get your hands dirty, like let's do it. It has that kind of new age engineering idea of let's build it yesterday.
Right.
Yeah, let's get it done. Oh, that's interesting. And I see throughout your career as well, you've had a variety of roles, and quite a lot of editing um, style roles. How have,
I write a lot.
yeah,
Is that what you meant? Yeah.
yeah. Like editorial roles, sorry, I suppose a better word for it. How have you found managing that throughout um, your career? Is it something which you just feel you have to do, and so do it, or is it like kind of side hustle type things, or was it your main focus for roles?
It was no, I think it's just and it's always kind of been a side hustle, if I'm being honest. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was one of my professors in undergrad said, "You're a really great writer. It'd be great if you could figure out a way to put that to use." So I I always very entrepreneurial, always interested in kind of what else can I be doing. So while I
Mm-hmm.
was working at an architecture firm, I started writing for a blog called Inhabitat, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know where Inhabitat is now, but at the time, I don't know, that was in 2004 or 3. That was like before like writing for a blog, like people could actually say they're making a living off of writing for a blog.
Yeah.
But I was getting paid to write, and I really enjoyed it. And I like, part of what I do is part of my daily role is research. So it's more about sharing what I find. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then now really, I got accepted to the LinkedIn Accelerator program last year. And it was interesting. That program forced me to write pretty regularly just about my point of view and share it on LinkedIn. And
What is the accelerator program? Sorry.
there's a LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program.
Mm-hmm.
So, they were trying not, I think creators are known for being on platforms like Instagram or TikTok. Creators aren't necessarily known for being on platforms like LinkedIn. So
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to attract creators to their program, their platform.
Yeah.
So every year they have a different accelerator program that you can apply for, and they give you all the tips and tricks about like how you should be using hashtags on LinkedIn. And a requirement out of that, your commitment out of that is to post so often. Um, but the rewards saw out of doing that program, kind of the connections I made, not only on LinkedIn, the opportunities to jump on other podcasts or to come in and speak to organizations really took off, the more consistently I posted on LinkedIn. So
Mm-hmm.
this year for 2023, I kind of made I I made
A New Year's resolution.
a resolution to post something every
Yeah.
day on LinkedIn to force that writing habit. Also, I think the more you write, the easier it is to continue to write rather than you know it's a practice thing.
Yeah.
So
It's definitely an
so
art form.
yeah, so that's, I don't know. And with everything that's going on in tech, I feel like building up my own personal brand right now is really important. So if
Mm-hmm.
should anything happen, like I love my role, I love where I am at. Um, but my LinkedIn feed is also filled with people that love their roles and love their with where they're at. and yet the business decision came down to them no longer being in that position. I feel like right now there's kind of an undercurrent of the reason why I'm doing this is to build my personal brand. So if I ever need to make a transition, I'm making that transition a lot more easier for myself in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that makes sense. And I think it's the personal brand thing. I remember a couple of years ago, a couple of the entrepreneurs I used to follow on YouTube, they would always talk about it. But I was kind of reluctant to try and do like a kind of personal brand thing. I don't know if it was just like the anxiety of wanting to hide behind a bigger brand, maybe, so it wasn't my face type thing. But I've noticed in a few of these types of entrepreneurial themes online is that they you wonder if they're gonna kind of pop up and go away. It's like a kind of fitness influencer or something. But every couple of years you look back and you go, oh, maybe if I started it then, it would have been a bit better now. And I think the personal brand one is a good one to touch on because as you're saying with like LinkedIn, a couple of years ago people started posting on LinkedIn as if it was Facebook, and you'd be like, oh, no one's gonna look at that. It's just like they're just posting about their life or like some blog post or something. But now you're the odd one out if you don't do it. So you need to start building that
I
personal
wouldn't use it
brand.
like I do Facebook, but you still have to
Yeah.
deliver value. Otherwise, people aren't going to be. I block people that are just posting
Well, see,
pure Facebook for on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why you won't be seeing them. You must have blocked them, because we all know the type, telling you what they're getting up to the weekend.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with you telling me what you're up to for the weekend, but I think like for me, the quality of the post then becomes tying like a mental health and wellness spin into that conversation, right? Like it's important to take time away. That's why I'm going away with my family to do XYZ. You're just like, look, I made brownies with the kids, which I do on Instagram, but not on LinkedIn.
yeah.
Get off my LinkedIn feed for that stuff. So.
Exactly.
You were saying about like always been entrepreneurial and writing and stuff. How do you have any tips for managing your time in that regard, or managing just expectations and stuff?
Yeah, I mean it's you're always trading on time. I think it ultimately depends on what's most important to you. I find myself often being asked, how do you have all the time to do X, Y, and Z? I think it's because that's how I've chosen to prioritize my time, right? Uh, so rather than choosing to go out with my friends on the weekdays in my early 20s, which that ultimately still happened too, I would spend a lot of nights writing. So I think it's you just kind of you make time for the things that you want to have in your life. And I've always struggled with this idea of work-life balance. And I think I've been very open about my working hours. So I'm a mom now. So I do what I can during the day. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old. We have an au pair to help us. They go to school. But my most productive hours over the pandemic has literally become 9 p.m. at night to 2 a.m. in the morning. And people hear that and they're like, oh my God, I could never do that,
Yeah.
which is fine. Like, I get it. It's a little bit crazy, but that's what works for me. So I think you just have to kind of figure out what works for you and what you want to do with your time. I'm also back up at 7 or 8 in the morning. So
You must be exhausted, Evelyn.
I'm not though, because I'm enjoying this conversation. I enjoy what I do. And I feel like that gives me the energy to do everything that I want to do. And I have every time I go into a new position and I have that first conversation with my manager or my potential manager, they know what I'm up to. They know that I might be taking some time off during the workday to jump on a podcast, or be a part or do my AIA, participate in the American Institute of Architects. They know that it's not unheard of to be getting messages from me at like 1 a.m. in the morning, because like that's just the time that I'm most productive. But I think when we talk about like giving your employees a flexible work schedule and allowing them to work at a time that's most productive for them, it includes people like me, the outliers, that like it's just the most productive time. I have a nice background right now, but I'm literally sitting on the floor of my bedroom because it's the best place to do a podcast in the house. We don't have an office where I can close a door on. So like that time of night is when the rest of the house goes to sleep, and I like have heads down, focus uninterrupted time.
Yeah.
No, I think you touched on kind of two good points from that. Is one, it's knowing oneself and what you want to do. So oftentimes you'll find people being like, "How do you do that?" And it's just because that's just not what they want to do. Because I was always bad for being excessively logical about things, and then I realized it's like, why do I want to do something? And I'd always question myself, why, and try and like draw down this route. But now I just realize it's like, do you want to do it or not? Like if you want to be a millionaire and you can do this every day, but would you really do it? Do you want to do it? No. So just kind of follow what you want within reason. But I forgot what I was saying. Second point, what was it?
But if you're truly doing what you're passionate about, like when I get a lot of people asking me to help them with their career path, and I just follow what brings you the most energy, right? If you're in a job where you feel drained at the end of every day and you're only doing the 9 to 5 grind, I feel like no one works 9 to 5 anymore, but if you're only doing the grind and you find yourself drained at the end of the day, then are you really doing what you want to do? So just kind of follow what gives you energy is kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I can attest to that. And that when I've been doing like 9 to 5 work, literally kind of 9 to 5 work and not liking it, you are exhausted. You come home and you're kind of like, oh, sluggish, and then you lie about, binge Netflix, and eventually fall asleep. But then when I'm working on my like little side hustles and different entrepreneurial type deals, which I really enjoy, I end up probably like working until like 10, 11 at night without even realizing. And then you're up at 7, 8, and you're like, oh, just straight back to work. And you just feel as if you have all this energy because you're just so driven to do it. And I think that's the key, is to find things which drive you, not that motivate you.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant to talk to you. Great opportunity to talk to someone in a role which I'm so unfamiliar with. So I really appreciate your time. Where can people find you? Obviously it'll be in the description, but just for those listening.
Yeah, so you can find me on, I would love for you to find me and follow me on LinkedIn, Evelyn M. Lee. Actually, I think it might just be Evelyn Lee. But I am definitely on Twitter and Instagram at Evelyn M. Lee. And I have my own podcast, but it's for architects that want to change the profession. So you're welcome to listen in. But to my knowledge, my husband and my parents have never listened to a show. So I don't feel bad if it's a very niche podcast. So it's okay. But I do run a consultancy firm helping architecture firms evolve their practice, and that's at practiceofarchitecture.com. And the podcast is Practice Disrupted.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully people will have a listen, because when I had a look and a listen, I think it does have that niche, but I think quite a lot of messages which are given in regard to career changes and in structural management and practice generally. You can get a lot out of it, whether you're in the specific domain or not. As we were saying, like for your role in Slack, It's like, everywhere has the kind of same things. It's just the specific little twists and turns that are different domain to domain. But anyway.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks. And thanks for listening, Luke. So
Yeah.
that's however many more episodes than my parents and husband put together that you listened to. So yeah.
What can I say? I'm a dedicated learner. Dedicated listener. Anyway, have a brilliant day and thanks a lot for coming on.